The sun had just begun to set over Earth, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. In the quiet of the evening, a spaceship, shaped like a giant silver ring, appeared out of nowhere. It hovered gently above the ground, shining like a star. People all over the world gasped in awe as the ship slowly descended, its lights flickering in strange patterns. In a small town in America, Dr. Eliza Williams was enjoying a quiet evening at home, reading a book when her phone buzzed with a notification. The news flashed on the screen. Alien ship lands in the Midwest. First contact. Her eyes widened. She had always dreamed of this moment, but now that it was happening, she didn't know what to think. Was this real? Were humans finally going to meet an alien species? Before she could process the information, her phone rang. It was her boss, Dr. John Carter, calling from the science division. "Eliza, get to the lab immediately. We need you." His voice was tense but excited. Eliza grabbed her jacket, rushed out the door, and hopped into her car. As she drove toward the government research center, her mind raced with questions. What did these aliens want? Would they be friendly? Were they going to try to take over the planet, like in the movies? She shook her head, trying to calm herself. This wasn't a movie. This was real life. When she arrived at the lab, she found dozens of scientists and government officials already gathered around the large monitors in the control room. On the screen was the alien ship, now fully landed in a field outside of a small town. A group of people stood nearby, watching the ship cautiously. No one knew what to expect. "This is it," Dr. Carter said, his voice full of wonder. "First contact. We've been preparing for this moment for decades." Eliza nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The excitement in the room was contagious. The air was thick with nervous energy, but also with hope. Humans had always looked up at the stars, dreaming of meeting someone, something out there. And now, that dream was about to become a reality. After a few tense moments, a door on the side of the ship opened. Slowly, a figure emerged. It was tall, with smooth, pale skin that shimmered under the setting sun. Its eyes were large and glowing, and its body seemed to hum with energy. The alien stood still for a moment, looking around at the humans in the field, then took its first step onto Earth. The crowd gasped and whispered to each other. The alien's movements were graceful, but there was a clear sense of caution in the way it approached. It seemed just as unsure of the humans as they were of it. Dr. Carter leaned into the microphone. "This is it, Eliza. This is where you come in." Eliza stepped forward, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. She had spent years studying human behavior and communication, and now she was about to apply everything she knew to interact with an entirely new species. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. The alien's voice suddenly echoed through the field, clear and strange. "Greetings, Earth beings," it said in perfect English, though its tone was soft and mechanical. "I am Zarnak of the Orvans. We have traveled from beyond your stars. We seek knowledge, understanding, and cooperation." The crowd was silent. Eliza's mind raced. Orvans? She had never heard of that species. She glanced around the room, her eyes meeting Dr. Carter's. He was already motioning for her to approach the alien. With careful steps, Eliza moved forward. She felt every eye on her, but she kept her gaze steady. The alien seemed to sense her approach and lowered its head slightly in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. "I am Dr. Eliza Williams," she said, her voice steady despite the excitement. "Welcome to Earth, Zarnak. We are honored by your visit." Zarnak tilted its head, clearly curious. "We have studied your planet for some time, but there is much we do not understand. We have questions." Eliza nodded. "We are here to help. Please, ask your questions." Zarnak paused for a moment, then spoke again, its voice calm but filled with curiosity. "I have studied your species in great detail, and I must admit, I find one thing particularly confusing." Zarnak's glowing eyes locked onto Eliza's, and the entire field seemed to hold its breath. "You human," Zarnak began, really do that? To reproduce? To create life? The alien's tone was filled with both confusion and wonder. Eliza blinked, taken aback by the question. She hadn't expected this to be their first topic of conversation. But there it was, Zarnak had asked, and now she would have to answer. The crowd around her fell silent, watching intently. Eliza's mind raced for a moment. How could she explain human reproduction to an alien? She smiled politely, trying to stay calm. Yes, Eliza replied. It's how we bring new life into the world. But there's a lot more to it than just biology. Zarnak nodded slowly, processing the information. I see, it said, its voice still tinged with disbelief. And may I try to understand more fully? The entire crowd gasped. The air was thick with tension as Eliza stood in front of Zarnak, trying to process his unexpected question. May I try? The alien's voice echoed in the field, and the crowd around them seemed to hold their breath. Eliza's heart raced. She wasn't sure what Zarnak meant, but the expression on his face made it clear. He was seriously curious. Before Eliza could respond, Dr. Carter quickly stepped forward, his face flushed with nervous excitement. Wait, Zarnak, he said, holding up his hands. Let's slow down a bit. We need to understand each other before we move forward. You've asked a very interesting question, but there's a lot more to human reproduction than just what you see on the surface. Zarnak blinked his glowing eyes, clearly puzzled. Then, explain it to me. I wish to understand. Eliza took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. She had never imagined she would be explaining human reproduction to an alien, especially one so advanced. She motioned for Zarnak to follow her as they walked toward a small nearby research station. Dr. Carter and the other scientists quickly joined them, ready to assist. Inside the station, the team began setting up equipment to help explain human biology. Eliza knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she was determined to do her best. All right, Zarnak, she began. Human reproduction is not just about the physical process. It's about emotions, relationships, and the connection between people. We don't just reproduce in a biological sense. There's love, trust, and respect. Zarnak tilted its head, clearly intrigued. Emotions. You humans need emotions to reproduce. That is unusual. Dr. Carter, ever the scientist, jumped in. Well, Zarnak, you have to understand that human reproduction is deeply tied to our emotions and social structures. When two people decide to start a family, they often form a bond. This bond is based on love, which makes the process more meaningful. Eliza continued, trying to break it down into simpler terms. Humans have relationships that are built over time. We form partnerships based on trust, affection, and care for one another. This connection makes us want to create life together, to build something bigger than just ourselves. Zarnak's eyes blinked, its face unreadable. I see, but why not just produce offspring through a more direct method? It seems simpler. Eliza smiled, trying not to laugh at Zarnak's bluntness. Well, for humans, it's not that simple. We believe that creating a life is a beautiful and emotional experience. It's not just about making more humans. It's about sharing something special with someone we care about. It's about building a future together. Zarnak nodded slowly, clearly processing the information. This emotional bond, it is important to your species. Yes, Eliza said, her voice calm but passionate. The bond is everything. It's what makes human life so special. We don't just live to exist. We live to share, to love, and to grow together. Without that emotional connection, reproduction would just be a biological act, not something we cherish. Zarnak paused for a moment, deep in thought. But if the process involves emotions, does that mean you cannot reproduce without this bond? Eliza looked at Zarnak and shook her head. That's right. For humans, the connection between two people is the foundation. Without that connection, it's difficult for us to have children. Our biology might allow reproduction in a more clinical way, but it's the emotional bond that makes it complete. The alien took a few moments to digest this new information. "This is very different from our species," Zarnak said softly. "On Orva, we reproduce through a scientific process. There is no need for emotions, no need for partnerships. It is efficient, yes, but it is not personal." Eliza's eyes softened as she considered Zarnak's words. "I understand. But I think that's why human life is so rich and meaningful. We form families, we nurture our children, and we build communities. It's not just about making more humans. It's about creating something special with the people we care about." Zarnak looked out the window at the stars, its mind racing. "Your species values connection so much. It is fascinating." Dr. Carter, always eager to learn, spoke up. "Zarnak, if I may, we also believe that this emotional connection extends beyond just the act of reproduction. It influences how we raise our children, how we interact with others, and how we build our societies. It's not just about biology. It's about living together in a way that supports one another." The alien turned to face them, its expression thoughtful. "This is new to me. I have never considered that emotions could play such a role in reproduction. I now see that human life is much more complex than I thought." Eliza smiled warmly. "I'm glad you're beginning to understand. It's not always easy to explain, but our emotions are at the core of who we are as humans." Zarnak nodded, as if coming to a quiet realization. Perhaps there is something to this human way after all. It may not be as efficient as our methods, but it has a depth that we have never known. Eliza felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that they had made some progress. "I'm happy to share what we can, Zarnak. We may be different, but I think there's a lot we can learn from each other." As the conversation continued, the alien's curiosity grew, and the team of scientists and humans continued to explain the complexities of human relationships and reproduction. The more Zarnak learned, the more fascinated it became, eager to understand the emotional aspects that made human life so unique. The days following Zarnak's surprising question were filled with confusion, curiosity, and laughter. The Orvans, especially Zarnak, were eager to understand everything about human reproduction. They had studied Earth's biology from a distance, but the emotional and social aspects were completely new to them. Zarnak's questions had left the team of scientists, including Eliza, in a state of constant thinking and discussion. One morning, Dr. Carter called for a meeting. Eliza, still processing the strange events, joined the rest of the team. Zarnak and his assistant, Orvac, were already waiting in the conference room. They looked just as curious and excited as ever. "All right, everyone," Dr. Carter began. "We've made progress in explaining human reproduction to the Orvans, but I think it's time for something more hands-on. We need to help Zarnak and Orvec truly experience human culture." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean exactly?" Dr. Carter smiled. "I'm proposing an exchange. We'll set up a few experiences for Zarnak and Orvac. They'll observe and try to engage in our human traditions, from dating to relationships. We need to help them understand our emotions and culture firsthand." Zarnak's eyes lit up with excitement. "This sounds interesting. I am ready to learn." Orvac, standing next to Zarnak, nodded eagerly. "Yes, we wish to understand everything." Eliza wasn't so sure. The idea of teaching an alien about human romance seemed strange, and the thought of it going wrong made her nervous. But it was too late to back out now. The plan was set. The first experience was supposed to be simple, a human-style date. Dr. Carter had arranged for Zarnak and Orvac to go on a date with 2 volunteers, Eliza and a fellow scientist, David. The goal was to show them how humans interact with each other, how dating works, and how emotions play a role in building relationships. Zarnak and Orvac were eager, but they had no idea how complicated human behavior could be. As Eliza and David waited at a small, cozy restaurant, they looked out the window and saw the two aliens approaching. Zarnak was dressed in what he called a human-like outfit, which, to Eliza's surprise, was a shiny silver jumpsuit. Orvac wore something similar, but it looked even more metallic. Eliza couldn't help but chuckle. "This is going to be interesting," she muttered. As Zarnak and Orvac sat down, they seemed uncomfortable. They had no idea what to do with their hands, and their eyes darted nervously around the restaurant. Zarnak leaned over to Eliza and whispered, "What do I do now?" "Do I? What is the human phrase?" "Flirt." Eliza stifled a laugh. "No, Zarnak. You don't need to flirt. Just relax. Enjoy the meal and talk. Human interactions are simple. We like getting to know each other, not just through words, but through feelings." Zarnak nodded, trying to mimic Eliza's calm demeanor. "Feelings. Right. We will try." The dinner began, and things quickly became awkward. Zarnak and Orvac tried to understand the concept of small talk, but their questions were strange and direct. "Do you like food for its taste or its nutritional value?" Zarnak asked David. Orvac turned to Eliza and asked, "Why do you smile when you are happy? Does smiling make happiness real?" David and Eliza exchanged awkward glances. "Well, it's just what we do," David said, trying to sound patient. The evening progressed with more odd questions and miscommunications. Zarnak tried to imitate human gestures, but his attempts were stiff and robotic. Orvac didn't seem to understand the concept of personal space and kept leaning too close to Eliza, making her uncomfortable. When the waiter came to take their order, Orvac stared at the menu with wide eyes, clearly overwhelmed. "Is there a drink that makes humans feel happy?" Orvac asked. Eliza chuckled nervously. "We call it wine, but that's a little complicated. Maybe just try some water for now." Zarnak and Orvac tried their best, but by the end of the night, the date had turned into a series of awkward pauses and puzzled looks. Neither Zarnak nor Orvac had truly understood what they were supposed to feel or how to behave in the situation. As they left the restaurant, Zarnak turned to Eliza. "I do not understand. Why is this so difficult? On Orva, we simply reproduce. There is no need for this dating thing." Eliza laughed, feeling a little embarrassed, but also grateful for the humor in the situation. "It's not about reproduction, Zarnak. It's about connection. You have to understand, we humans build relationships before we do anything else. It's a process, and sometimes it's messy." Orvac nodded thoughtfully. "I think I am starting to understand, but it is very strange." The night ended with the two aliens still puzzled but somehow a little closer to understanding human emotions. Eliza smiled to herself, knowing this was just the beginning of a long and sometimes frustrating cultural exchange. As the team debriefed back at the lab, Dr. Carter chuckled. "Well, that didn't go exactly as planned, but we've made progress, haven't we?" Eliza nodded, though she was exhausted. "Maybe next time, we start with something simpler." The aliens had learned a valuable lesson. Human relationships weren't as simple as they seemed, and while their cultural exchange had been far from smooth, it had opened the door to deeper questions and greater curiosity. Zarnak and Orvac were more determined than ever to learn about the strange and wonderful world of human emotions. After their awkward date, Zarnak and Orvac were more confused than ever. They had tried to understand human emotions, but their attempts had only made things more complicated. Yet their curiosity about human relationships had not faded. They were determined to keep learning, even if it meant making mistakes along the way. A few days later, Dr. Carter called another meeting at the lab. The aliens, Zarnak and Orvac, were already waiting in the conference room, their glowing eyes filled with interest. Eliza walked in, feeling a bit nervous. She wasn't sure how much further this cultural exchange would go, but she knew it was important. The aliens were genuinely trying to understand the human experience. "We've had some Interesting developments, Dr. Carter said, glancing at Eliza with a smile. It's clear that Zarnok and Orvac are ready for something deeper. They want to understand emotions, not just through observation, but through experience. Eliza raised an eyebrow. What kind of experience? Dr. Carter explained. I'm suggesting an emotional simulation. We can create controlled environments to help them feel what human emotions are like. Love, friendship, sadness, and maybe even jealousy. It might help them understand us better. Zarnok and Orvac exchanged excited looks. We are ready, Zarnok said, his voice filled with anticipation. We wish to understand your emotions fully. Eliza wasn't sure what to think. She knew that emotions were complex and messy, and trying to simulate them could lead to some unexpected results. But there was no turning back now. The lab team quickly set up the equipment, and soon they were ready to begin. The first simulation was simple, a scenario where Zarnok and Orvac were placed in a room with two other humans, David and Eliza. The goal was to show how human emotions worked in the context of friendship and trust. All right, Zarnok and Orvac, Dr. Carter said, adjusting the equipment. This simulation will help you experience the bond of friendship. You'll interact with Eliza and David, and we'll observe how you respond. Eliza smiled at the aliens, trying to make them feel comfortable. Don't worry, just be yourselves, and try to connect with us. The simulation began, and at first, everything seemed normal. Zarnok and Orvac interacted with David and Eliza like they were old friends. They laughed, shared stories, and played simple games. The simulation was designed to create a lighthearted atmosphere, one where emotions like joy and trust could naturally form. But as the session continued, Zarnok began to show signs of confusion. His glowing eyes flickered, and he stepped back. What is this feeling? This discomfort. Eliza was surprised. Zarnok, what's wrong? I do not understand, Zarnok replied. I feel strange. It is not just trust. It is something more, a feeling of longing. David, who had been observing closely, spoke up. That's the feeling of attachment. When we grow close to someone, we start to care for them deeply, almost like they are part of us. Orvac, who had been watching quietly, suddenly spoke. But I feel it too. This sense of wanting to protect. Eliza realized what was happening. You're experiencing what we call friendship in a deeper way. It's more than just enjoyment. It's about a connection that makes us care for each other. You're feeling a sense of loyalty. Zarnok's eyes widened. So this bond makes me feel attached to you, Eliza. David. Eliza nodded. Yes, that's exactly it. The more time we spend together, the stronger that bond becomes. It's like we're part of a team. We support each other, and we trust each other. Orvac spoke up again. This is confusing. It is like a pull toward you, but it is not physical. It is emotional. Eliza smiled gently. Yes, it's emotional. And it's what makes humans so special. We don't just form connections out of necessity. We form them out of love and care for each other. The simulation paused, and Dr. Carter checked the results. Fascinating. It seems they've experienced the essence of human friendship. But Zarnok, Orvac, are you feeling okay? Zarnok took a deep breath and nodded. It is overwhelming, but I believe I understand. This bond, this attachment, it is vital. We do not feel this on Orva. We are taught to be efficient, not to connect in this way. Orvac's eyes seemed to soften. We are beginning to understand your world. It is emotional. Dr. Carter smiled, pleased with the results. It's a breakthrough. But now we need to explore another emotion, love. Are you both ready? Zarnok and Orvac hesitated for a moment, their glowing eyes reflecting a mix of excitement and uncertainty. They had just begun to understand friendship, but love was a whole new level. We are ready, Zarnok said, his voice steady. We wish to experience it, even if it is difficult to understand. Eliza felt a twinge of sympathy for the aliens. They had been through so much already, but the emotions they were about to experience would be even more complex. She wasn't sure how they would handle it, but she knew this was an important step for them. "Okay," Eliza said softly. "Let's begin the next simulation." The lad was quiet as the next phase of the experiment began. This time, the goal was to simulate the emotion of love, the deep bond that humans formed not only with their friends but with their romantic partners. Zarnak and Orvac would experience the connection that could exist between two people who truly cared for each other. Eliza could only imagine what the aliens would feel. It was one thing to understand friendship, but love was something much deeper. After experiencing friendship, Zarnak and Orvac were more curious than ever. Their understanding of human emotions had grown, but they were still far from grasping the full depth of what it meant to be human. The next challenge was even bigger: love. Eliza and the team had set up another simulation, this time focusing on the powerful, often complex emotion of love. Zarnak and Orvac were nervous but excited. They had no idea what to expect. They had learned about love from humans, but they had never felt it themselves. As the simulation began, Eliza and David stepped forward, ready to guide the aliens through the process. They had agreed that Eliza would be part of the experience, helping Zarnak understand the emotional layers involved, while David would assist Orvac. The room around them was softly lit, creating a calm atmosphere. The team set the simulation to create moments where the aliens would feel the emotional pull of human love. Zarnak looked at Eliza with uncertainty. "What is the first step?" he asked. Eliza smiled kindly. "The first step is understanding that love is more than just a feeling. It's about connection, trust, and caring for someone deeply. It's a bond that can grow over time." Zarnak nodded slowly, still unsure. "But how do I know when it happens? How do I feel this love?" Eliza paused for a moment, considering how to explain. "Love isn't something you can control, Zarnak. It's something that happens naturally when you care for someone so much that you want to protect them, support them, and share your life with them. It's a feeling that makes you want to be there for someone, no matter what." Zarnak was silent for a moment, his glowing eyes searching Eliza's face. "And you feel this for David?" he asked, his voice soft. Eliza smiled, her heart warmed by his genuine curiosity. "Yes, I do. It's a special bond, and it's not just about good times. Love also means being there for each other during tough times." Zarnak seemed to be processing this, but he still didn't quite understand. The simulation began to change, showing moments where Eliza and David shared quiet, meaningful looks. They sat close together, talking and laughing. Zarnak observed, his eyes focused intently on their interactions. Orvac, with David, was observing the same thing. At first, he seemed even more confused than Zarnak. "I do not understand," he said. "Why are you so close? Why do you seem happy just being near each other?" David smiled, trying to explain. "That's love, Orvac. Sometimes, just being close to someone makes you feel safe and happy. It's not about doing something grand. It's about sharing simple moments together." Orvac looked at David, his glowing eyes wide. "So you care for Eliza, not because of something she does, but because of how you feel around her?" David nodded. "Exactly. When you love someone, you care about them even when things aren't perfect. It's not about conditions or expectations. It's about knowing you want to be a part of each other's lives." Back across the room, Zarnak was starting to get it. He watched how Eliza and David's small gestures, like holding hands or exchanging smiles, seemed to create a bond between them. He could feel a shift inside him, a growing sense of warmth as he observed these quiet, tender moments. "I think I understand," Zarnak said, his voice quiet but thoughtful. "Love is not about actions or what we can gain. It is about what we are willing to give, even when there is no reason to. It is about wanting to share your life with someone, no matter what." Eliza smiled, proud of his progress. Exactly, Zarnuk. You're starting to get it. As the simulation continued, the two aliens began to experience their own version of love. They didn't yet fully understand all the layers, but they were starting to feel the emotional pull. Zarnuk was becoming more comfortable with the idea of caring for someone deeply, and Orvek, too, was showing signs of understanding. They began to ask questions about how love grew and how it could be nurtured. Zarnuk turned to Eliza. Is this love, then? This feeling of wanting to be near someone, to protect them? Eliza nodded. Yes, Zarnuk. But remember, love doesn't always feel easy. There are times when it's hard, when you feel unsure. But that's part of it. It's about growing together. Orvak turned to David. And you, David? Do you feel this love even when things are difficult? David thought for a moment. Yes, Orvek. Love isn't just about the happy times. It's about sticking together through the challenges. When you love someone, you want to fight through the tough moments because the bond you share is worth it. The simulation ended, and the room grew quiet. Zarnuk and Orvik looked at each other, their faces filled with understanding. They had felt something new, something powerful. They weren't sure they'd fully understood love yet, but they knew it was real. They had experienced it in a way they hadn't imagined. As the team gathered around, Dr. Carter smiled, looking at the two aliens. Well, I think we've made some real progress here. How are you feeling, Zarnuk? Orvak. Zarnuk took a deep breath. It is overwhelming, but it feels right. This connection, this bond, it is unlike anything I have ever known. Orvak nodded. I feel it too. This love, it is more than just a feeling. It is a force. Eliza smiled warmly. Yes, that's right. It's a force that shapes everything we do. It's what makes us human. The aliens were quiet for a moment, still processing everything they had learned. Zarnuk looked at Eliza and Orvik, looked at David, both of them beginning to understand the power of love. It wasn't just a concept. It was an experience, something that could change them forever. After experiencing the powerful emotions of friendship and love, Zarnuk and Orvak were starting to feel more connected to human life. But their journey of understanding wasn't over yet. There was still so much more to learn about the emotional complexity of humans. They had felt love, but they hadn't yet experienced the pain and challenges that came with it. It was time for the next phase of their emotional training. Dr. Carter and Eliza had decided to simulate the more difficult emotions: heartache, jealousy, and sadness. These were feelings that tested the strength of relationships, while the previous simulations had shown Zarnuk and Orvak the beauty of love. Now they would experience the more painful sides. The lab was set up for the new simulation. The atmosphere was dim, and the air seemed heavy with anticipation. Zarnuk and Orvik entered, still unsure of what to expect. Eliza and David were there to guide them through these more difficult emotions, but no one knew how the aliens would react. Dr. Carter spoke first. This next simulation will help you understand the challenges humans face. It's not just about the good feelings. Love can bring pain too, but it is part of being human. We face heartache and sadness, and we still choose to love. Zarnuk and Orvik nodded, but they looked nervous. They had never experienced emotions like this, and the unknown frightened them. We will begin with heartache, Eliza said gently. This will help you understand that love isn't always easy. The simulation began, and at first, nothing seemed unusual. Zarnuk and Orvak were placed in a scenario where they were both in relationships. Zarnuk had a human partner in the simulation, a kind woman named Sarah. Orvak was with a man named Ethan. At first, they felt happiness. The bonds they had formed were strong. But then, the simulation introduced a new twist. Sarah and Ethan suddenly began to pull away. Zarnuk's heart raced. He looked at Eliza in confusion. What is happening? Why are they turning away from us? Eliza's voice was soft. Sometimes people change. Sometimes They fall out of love or need space. It's not always something we can control. Heartache happens when the person you love begins to pull away. Zarnak felt a strange, sharp pain in his chest. It wasn't like the happiness he had felt before. It was emptiness, a feeling of loss. "I do not like this," Zarnak said quietly. Orvac, too, looked troubled. His eyes flickered, unsure of how to process the emotions flooding through him. "This is painful. Is this what love is? A feeling that can disappear?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, sometimes it does. Heartache comes when something you care about is lost or changes in a way you can't control. But that doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It just means that life can be difficult." The simulation continued, showing moments of sadness. Zarnak tried to reach out to Sarah, but she pulled away further. Orvac watched as Ethan seemed distant, not responding to him the way he had before. The pain they felt was deep, and for the first time, they understood what it meant to have their hearts hurt. I do not know how to make this better," Zarnak said, his voice full of confusion. "Sometimes there is nothing to fix," Eliza said gently. "The pain you feel is part of the process of loving someone. You can't always control how people change, but you can still choose to move forward. It doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you have to let go, even if it hurts." Orvac turned to Eliza. "But how can I let go? I care for him so much. If I let go, will I stop caring?" Eliza shook her head. "No. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It just means that you accept the pain and allow yourself to heal. It's about accepting that sometimes love isn't enough to keep people together. But that doesn't make the love less real." Zarnak was quiet for a long time. The emotions were overwhelming, and he struggled to make sense of them. He had always believed in logic, in efficiency, but these feelings didn't fit neatly into his understanding of the world. "I do not want to feel this way," he said softly, almost to himself. Eliza placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know. It's hard. But this is the reality of human emotions. We love, we hurt, we heal. It's part of life." The simulation changed once again. This time, Zarnak and Orvac were shown a moment of reconciliation where they both learned how to let go of the pain. Sarah and Ethan were no longer present, but their memories remained. Zarnak and Orvac learned that love wasn't just about staying together. It was about growth, understanding, and sometimes letting go for the sake of personal healing. The simulation ended, and the room was quiet. Zarnak and Orvac sat, still processing what they had just felt. The emotional weight of heartache was something they had never experienced before, and they were shaken by the depth of the pain. "It is hard to understand," Zarnak said, his voice heavy. "But I see now that love is not simple. It is not just joy or happiness. It has shadows." Orvac nodded slowly. "Yes, and those shadows are part of us too." Eliza smiled at them both. "Yes, love is messy, and it's not always easy, but it's also what makes us human. We learn, we grow, and we carry the memories of the people we love." Dr. Carter turned to the team. "Well, it looks like we've taken another big step. Zarnak, Orvac, are you ready to continue? There's still more to learn." Zarnak and Orvac looked at each other. They were exhausted, but something had changed in their eyes. They were beginning to understand the complex, beautiful, and sometimes painful nature of human emotions. "We are ready," Zarnak said. Orvac nodded. "We will keep learning." And so the journey of emotional discovery continued. The aliens were starting to see that human emotions weren't just a series of steps or patterns. They were alive, changing, and complex. And Zarnak and Orvac knew that the more they learned, the more they would discover about the human experience and about themselves. Zarnak and Orvac had learned so much about human emotions during their time on Earth. They had experienced love, joy, heartache, and loss. Each emotion was different, each more complex than they had ever imagined. And yet, they still didn't fully understand the depth of the human experience. But now, it was time for the final lesson. Dr. Carter gathered everyone in the lab. Zarnak and Orvek stood, their glowing eyes reflecting curiosity and a little anxiety. Eliza and David were there too, as always, ready to guide the aliens through the final step of their emotional journey. Today, Dr. Carter began. We're going to explore something that connects all of the emotions you felt. Resilience. It's the ability to keep going, even when things are tough. It's what allows humans to face challenges, heartbreak, and loss, and still find a way to move forward. Zarnak and Orvek listened closely. They had learned about resilience before, but they had never truly felt it. Now, it was time to understand it deeply. We're going to set up a scenario for you, Dr. Carter explained. In this simulation, you will face a difficult challenge. You'll have to decide whether to give up or keep going, even when everything seems lost. The simulation began, and Zarnak and Orvek found themselves in a dark, cold forest. The trees were tall and twisted, and the air was thick with fog. They were lost, and they could feel the weight of the situation pressing on them. "What do we do now?" Zarnak asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Eliza appeared in the simulation, walking toward them. "You have to keep moving. Even though the path is unclear, you can't give up. You have to find a way through." Orvek looked around at the dark woods. "But there's no way out. Everything is so hard. How can we keep going?" Eliza smiled gently. "That's the point of resilience. It's not about knowing where the end is. It's about trusting yourself and pushing forward, even when you don't know what will happen next." Zarnak looked at Orvek and then at Eliza. He wasn't sure if he could keep going, but something inside him began to shift. The idea of resilience, of not giving up, started to make sense. They had faced many challenges during their journey, and they had always found a way to overcome them. Now this was no different. "We will try," Zarnak said, his voice steady. They began to walk through the foggy forest, step by step. It was hard to see, and every direction seemed to lead nowhere. But they kept moving. With each step, they felt stronger, even though the path ahead seemed endless. Suddenly, the forest opened up to a beautiful meadow, bathed in golden sunlight. Zarnak and Orvek stood still, amazed by the beauty before them. The struggle they had gone through felt worth it. "This is what resilience feels like," Eliza said, standing beside them. "It's not always easy, and it's not always clear. But when you keep moving forward, even when it's tough, you find moments of peace and beauty that make everything worthwhile." Orvek looked at the meadow, feeling a warmth inside. "I understand now. Even when everything seems difficult, we keep going. We trust ourselves, and eventually we find something good." Zarnak nodded, his glowing eyes filled with understanding. "We do not give up, even when we are lost. The journey itself is part of the reward." As the simulation ended, Zarnak and Orvek looked at each other with a new sense of wisdom. They had learned that human emotions were not just about experiencing joy or love. It was also about facing difficult times, accepting the pain, and finding the strength to continue. Dr. Carter smiled at them. "Well done, Zarnak. Well done, Orvek. You've learned more than we could have hoped for. You understand resilience now, and that's something that will help you in every part of life." Zarnak looked at Eliza, his expression soft. "Thank you, Eliza. Thank you, David. You have shown us what it means to be human. It is not just about emotions. It is about how we face the challenges life gives us." Orvek nodded, his voice filled with gratitude. "We are grateful. We have learned more than we ever expected. Humans are strong in ways we never understood." Eliza smiled, feeling proud of the progress they had made. "You've learned the most important lessons: to love, to care, to hurt, and to keep going. And I think you've also learned that even though human emotions are complicated, they are what make us truly human." Zarnak and Orvek looked at each other, their eyes full of understanding. They had come a long way from the cold, logical beings they had once been. They now saw the value in the messy, beautiful experience of being human. "You have given us much to think about," Zarnuk said. "We are no longer just observers. We are part of this journey with you." Elisa smiled warmly. "And we're glad you are." As the day ended, Zarnuk and Orvek left the lab, their minds full of new emotions and ideas. They had learned what it meant to be human, and though their journey wasn't over, they had come to understand the most important truths about love, resilience, and connection.